Good evening. Like everyone here, I found the recent events in our country regarding the police and the African American community very troubling. To some of us, awareness of this isn't anything new. If you have friends or family who are people of color, you've heard stories of discrimination, let alone their interactions with the police. I'm honored to provide the Inspirational for a Dane County Board meeting in the month of June, since June celebrates two significant events and holidays. These include Pride Month, as celebrated by the LGBTQ community, and Juneteenth, tomorrow, June 19th, that Cherry just mentioned in our diversity training, which celebrates the end of slavery in the U.S. To an LGBTQ person like me, Pride Month or June has lots of meaning to both reflect and celebrate. 1 year ago was the 50th anniversary of the beginning of the modern gay rights movement, or known as the Stonewall Uprising, which occurred on June 29th, 1969. At the county board meeting 1 year ago, we celebrated Pride Month by placing small pride flags on every desk, including the dais where the chair sits, and had pride flags on the monitors in room 201. It was very colorful, to say the least. In the following week's print copy of the Isthmus, there was a photo of Supervisors Ritt and Miles surrounded by colorful flags. It was great. Also, Supervisor Kilmer commented on Facebook that he never thought he'd see the county board chamber decorated with pride flags and being so colorful. Also, I think we were flying the pride flag out in front of the city county building and are scheduled to do that again this June after Juneteenth has been fully celebrated. Regarding the Juneteenth flag that's currently flying in front of the city county building, I would like to thank Supervisor Stubbs for coordinating everything regarding flying this flag, as well as flying the Juneteenth flag above the state capitol, but also for being an ally and supporter of LGBTQ rights from the first time I met her, which was 15 years ago. I also want to thank Supervisor Stubbs for all the work she's done over the years in promoting diversity and inclusion in Dane County government, and especially with the creation of the Office of Equity and Inclusion. Also, regarding the pride flag, there are different types of pride flags. There's the traditional rainbow flag, which I'm sure everyone has seen, but the flag that we'll be flying it's like a new design that includes black and brown stripes, and also includes some colors that represent the trans rights movement. In contrast to 1 year ago, this year, I haven't felt very celebratory. With COVID-19 uncertainty and the glaring examples of how people of color and African Americans are treated by police across our entire country, and yet another murder committed by the City of Atlanta police has left me feeling discouraged. Then this past Monday, or 3 days ago, I heard about the Supreme Court's historic ruling. By a vote of 6-3, the court said Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which makes it illegal for employers to discriminate because of a person's sex, also covers sexual orientation and transgender status. It upheld rulings from lower courts that said sexual orientation discrimination was a form of sex discrimination. And surprisingly, that the decision was written by the first Supreme Court appointee of the current president, Neil Gorsuch, who was joined by Chief Justice Roberts and the court's 4 more liberal members to form a majority. With this ruling, I have some hope for our future and want to go back to the origins of the modern gay rights movement and some key figures in those events who are African American. As I mentioned, the modern gay rights movement started on June 28, 1969, when patrons of the Stonewall Inn and others on the streets nearby in New York City were tired of being regularly harassed by the New York City police in the only place they could feel safe and be themselves, namely gay bars. Marsha P. Johnson is credited with throwing the first brick of the Stonewall riots, hitting a police car windshield. Known as the Mother of Pride, a drag queen and lifelong activist who is still the most recognizable and widely celebrated figure from the Stonewall riots, and by they, I'm referring to Marsha P. Johnson, were heavily involved with both the Gay Liberation Front and ACTA. They also co-founded STAR, which stood for Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, a groundbreaking organization that housed homeless LGBTQ youth and sex workers in New York City. Years later, when asked why they were taking part in the protests, Marsha famously told reporters, "Darling, I want my gay rights now." Another prominent person in the Stonewall Uprising was Stormy Delivery, whose father was white and mother was African American, whose scuffle with the New York City police is credited with igniting the riots and spurred the crowd into acting. She was a performer and known as a butch lesbian, but also known as the Rosa Parks of the gay community in New York City. She was dragged out of the Stonewall bar in handcuffs and bleeding from her head when she yelled at the crowd standing in the street, "Why don't you guys do something?" as an officer picked her up and pushed her into the paddy wagon. After that, it's when the crowd, by all reports, became a mob and went berserk, and the rioting actually began. These two African Americans were instrumental in starting the gay rights movement, of which the successes I enjoy, and that gives me hope. Hope that we can continue to advance rights for the LGBTQ people, but also make progress in revising policing in our country and how we treat African Americans in our society. Finally, there are many more African American LGBTQ people who have contributed to our society and advanced civil rights. Some of these include Andrea Jenkins, who became the first Black, openly transgender woman ever elected to public office in the US to the Minneapolis, Minnesota City Council on November 7th, 2017. Reggie Williams started the National Task Force on AIDS Prevention in 1985, dedicated to expanding AIDS education and health access to Black, gay, and bisexual men. Lorraine Hansberry wrote a Raisin in the Sun in 1957, which went on to premiere in 1959 on Broadway, is credited with changing American drama forever. It was the first play on Broadway to be written by a Black woman, as well as the first Broadway play to have a Black director. Hansberry described herself as a, quote, heterosexually married lesbian. Baynard Rustin, mostly known as a key advisor to Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, is credited for Dr. King's nonviolent resistance tactics. Baynard was instrumental in the planning of the 1962 March on Washington and the New York City school boycott in 1964. Because he was gay, he did not receive public recognition for his work, but he did appear on the cover of Time magazine in 1963. Ellie Hearns began her career as a youth organizer in Ohio, and after the Trayvon Martin murder, she co-founded the Black Lives Matter Global Network. She also worked with Get Equal and the Trans Women of Color Collective. In 2017, she was named one of the 100 most influential African Americans by The Root magazine. She currently serves as the founder and executive director of the Marsha P. Johnson Institute, which supports Black trans women. And finally, James Baldwin, who grew up in Harlem and wrote such books as Notes of a Native Son and Giovanni's Room, both which feature Black LGBTQ characters and were published in the 1950s, well before the start of the gay rights movement. In times like this, I like to go to history to try to understand where we've been, how we got here, and how we can move forward. I find inspiration in historical figures and how some of them overcame insurmountable odds to make progress on civil rights. They give me hope. And the African American individuals I have mentioned are an inspiration to all of us. Finally, after the beautiful inspirational by Supervisor Doyle at the last county board meeting, we had a moment of silence for victims of police violence and the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm asking now for a moment of silence for Rayshard Brooks, who was killed last Friday, June 12th, by the City of Atlanta Police.